Pacific Rim is a 2013 movie by Guillermo del Toro, and it is inherently an awesome series. Let's all just pretend like that last movie did not happen, shall we? When it comes to kaiju stories, it is always difficult because a writer needs to be able to balance between the human perspective and the monster one. When you focus way too much on the monster's perspective, the spectacle can be really fun, but feel empty, like watching two action figures mash into each other. However, if you focus too much on the human side, it can become really boring, like really boring, as the audience can get tired if there isn't enough action. I think in this niche, you can find my favorite type of monster stories, that being destruction from the perspective of humans. But I digress. Pacific Rim is able to overcome this problem by linking them together to the point where they can't be separated. Having humans need to fight monsters through mechs that only work through their connection to someone else forces the narrative to focus on the human perspective and naturally transition into the monster one. Moreover, what makes the situation even crazier are the mechs themselves, as they are piloted by two people, not just one, forcing some sense of friction. In the end, Pacific Rim was able to do what many others couldn't: tell a compelling story from every perspective. It's been a minute, right? Yeah, I think so. Alright. Steel Battalion is fucking crazy. And I mean that in the meanest and nicest way possible. It is an Xbox game that came with its own unique controller for use. And I'll be honest, I have not played this game. It's not my fault, really. The thing is like $200. I'm glad you have it, I don't. This massive set can only be compared to a pilot's cockpit. You, the player, are forced to work within the parameters of the controls, which are overly complicated for no reason. Every single button and lever does something distinct, and you need to figure out what. But also, I can see how that is thrilling. You are forced to learn. When you do, the joy and accomplishment of doing it must be completely unique to every other experience out there. I do want to talk a bit more about the controls. The interface has 4 main components. 3 components are for your hands, and 1 for your feet. The pedals are for acceleration and braking. There are 2 control sticks, with the rest of the 3 components holding buttons that will be vital for your success. Most of the buttons are for controlling the weapons of the mech, which are mainly rockets, cannons, and rifles. But there are also mainly other buttons for other necessary options, such as oxygen supply, an eject button, and washing? What? So at its core, this game feels less like a mech simulator and more like a pilot mech simulator. Half the game is just figuring out how the controls work and becoming proficient with them. And for that reason, there isn't much of a story here, at least not textually. But subtextually, there is a lot to infer. The world is greedy and gray, giving this sense that these people have given up hope and a happy ending a long time ago. Or maybe it's because it's war. Pick your poison. Moreover, as cool as the mechs are, they are clunky, intentionally so, giving this sense that not only are they a new invention, but also leaders are using them because they're desperate. They're kind of a last resort in whatever war they're fighting. In the end, it doesn't really matter. This isn't about the world, it's about you and your mech, and how well you can control it to defeat other enemies. And this game does that strangely, but also pretty nicely. That is why I think about Pacific Rim with the mechanics of Steel Battalion would be crazy. Not a 10 out of 10 game, as it would be frustrating like Steel Battalion, but still fun in its own way. A game where the player needs to defeat kaijus with in-depth Jaeger interface. There is one issue though. In Pacific Rim, what makes the Jaegers work is having 2 pilots, and what those 2 need to do is increase their drift compatibility. But I would argue this detail makes the game unique enough to stand on its own. In this game, there would be a drift mechanic, where to play, you and a friend need to work together to control a Jaeger. Both players would have their own massive controller with in-depth inputs. Since they control one mech, the controls would be divided between the 2 of them. So for example, one of the player controls one of the legs, the screen, and one of the weapons, while the other one can control one of the arms, the comms, or the oxygen. In other words, the physical movements and their other functions are shared between them, and they need to coordinate to better operate the Jaeger. Kind of like one of those Twitch streamer games where they need to work together to accomplish a thing. Don't lie, we've all seen them. Now there is one glaring problem. The Jaegers are also piloted psychologically, with full body motion. which would be hard to copy with a controller. The easier answer would be to just change the motions of the movie into a game controller. But, you know, since we are just bullshitting here, we could go with something a bit more complex. We already have motion controls that were popular in the 2000s, and we have VR headsets that tend to use motion controls too. So, since we are already using a in-depth controller, we could make a new version that is similar to the Oculus 2 controller, where you have buttons on them for certain functions. But to either maneuver the Jaeger or adjust it, you need to use motion controls. It would be hard to make a complex motion sensor control, as they are made to be as simple as possible, but it is imperative to the experience that they are impossible to read at first glance. On a mass scale, this would, in practice, be a nightmare and impossible at first, but the game would encourage you to increase your drift, meaning your ability to sync together, and by the end of every level, the game ranks you on how high your synchronizing is. The main game would be similar to the movies. You and a friend need to fight monsters, and maybe a few Jaegers. Moreover, if they want to make an online option, you and a friend can fight other pilots in an arena to see who has the highest drift. I mean, I don't know, something like that. And yeah, that's my idea for a Pacific Rim X the Battalion game. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments. And I'll see you next time. Peace.